Andrew Parker Bowles might have moved on after his marriage to Queen Camilla, but is he still cozying up with the royal family?
Andrew Parker Bowles stayed silent about his split from Camilla for more than 3 decades. Now, he's finally breaking his silence and revealing the real reasons behind their divorce. What changed after all these years? Join us as we dive deep into Andrew's story and uncover the truth that's been hidden for too long, their aristocratic origins. In the late 1960s, Andrew Parker Bowles and Camilla Shand were the golden couple of British high society. Their names were often printed in the Tatler social pages, and they moved in the most elite circles. But their relationship was more than just a romantic match. It was a reflection of class, tradition, and the expectations of upper-class Britain. Andrew came from a deeply respected aristocratic family. His father, Derek Parker Bowles, was a close friend of the Queen Mother. This connection meant that Andrew was well known within royal circles from a young age. Raised in privilege and shaped by tradition, Andrew grew up surrounded by the customs and codes of Britain's upper class. He joined the British Army and quickly gained respect, eventually rising through the ranks to become a brigadier. Known for his dashing looks and military polish, Andrew was seen as the ideal gentleman, handsome, polite, well-bred, and ambitious. He had a reputation for being charming and popular with women, but few doubted his future as a solid, respectable member of Britain's elite. Camilla, too, came from a powerful and socially important family. Her father, Major Bruce Shand, was a decorated war hero. Her mother, Rosalind Cubitt, came from aristocratic roots and descended from a baron. Camilla's background was impeccable, but it was her personality that truly set her apart. She was known for her wit, her warm laugh, and her strong presence. People liked to be around her. Friends described her as smart, grounded, and confident. She wasn't loud or flashy, but she had an effortless charm that drew people in. Unlike some of her more formal peers, she had a relaxed, earthy sense of humor and wasn't afraid to speak her mind. That combination of high birth and real personality made her stand out. Andrew and Camilla's courtship began in this world of inherited privilege, polished manners, and social expectations. They met through mutual friends and shared interests. Both loved the countryside, horses, and the social life that surrounded fox hunting and polo. They were often seen together at weekend house parties in the English countryside, where the nation's wealthiest and most powerful mingled out of public view. Camilla cheered Andrew on at polo matches, and the couple became fixtures at elite gatherings across the south of England. Friends and observers thought they were a perfect fit. Two attractive, well-connected young people from the right backgrounds with shared passions and values. It looked like a relationship rooted in affection, but also one that made social sense. In aristocratic circles, love was often expected to fall in line with duty. Andrew and Camilla had affection, compatibility, and family approval. It was a match that made sense in every way. But behind the smiles and horse rides, there was already a quiet complication. Even in those early days, another name hovered in the background: Charles, Prince of Wales. At that time, Charles was still a young royal, not yet the future king who would later change everything. His early affair with Camilla had been short and intense, but it hadn't vanished. Though Camilla married Andrew while Charles was overseas with the Navy, the emotional connection between them never truly disappeared. Andrew might not have noticed it at first, or maybe he chose not to. To the world, it looked like he had won Camilla's heart. But Charles was always there in the distance, not yet a threat, but never fully gone. And that quiet presence would one day grow louder, much louder. The royal substitute. Before Andrew Parker Bowles and Camilla Shand said their vows, there was someone else, someone who had already left a deep emotional mark on Camilla's heart: Prince Charles. Camilla and Charles met in the early 1970s, and their connection was immediate. It wasn't just a short fling or a royal crush. According to people who knew them at the time, their bond was genuine, intense, and emotional. They had similar interests, especially a shared love for horses and the countryside. Camilla felt comfortable with Charles in a way that was rare. He made her laugh, and she helped him feel at ease away from the pressures of royal life. But the relationship had a problem. Camilla wasn't considered a suitable match for the future King of England. The royal family believed she was too experienced and not the right fit for the role of queen consort. When Charles was sent away on naval duty, pressure grew. Camilla, left behind, was expected to move on, and in this moment, Andrew Parker Bowles stepped into the picture more seriously. Andrew had known Camilla for years. Their social worlds had always overlapped. With Charles gone and with Camilla's future with him uncertain, Andrew became the more practical, more acceptable choice. He was charming, good-looking, deeply rooted in the aristocracy, and had a solid military career. More importantly, he was seen as a safe and respectable husband, one who ticked every box for a woman of Camilla's background. For Andrew, it felt natural. They had history, shared social ties, and seemed to get along well. From his point of view, their marriage was built on compatibility, tradition, and shared values. He loved Camilla and believed she loved him back. What he didn't know, or what he chose not to believe, was that he had never really been Camilla's first choice. As Andrew would later say in a private, leaked interview, "Charles never actually left our marriage, not for a moment." That sentence, simple but powerful, explains the foundation on which the marriage was built. Shaky and already crowded with a silent presence. Early on, there were subtle signs. Camilla kept old letters hidden away. She would take certain phone calls behind closed doors. She seemed to become more distant during specific times of the year, often when Charles returned from royal duties or held events at Highgrove. Andrew began to feel that even though he was the man by her side, there was always a shadow in the room, and that shadow was Charles. But Andrew didn't confront it directly, at least not right away. In aristocratic circles, affairs were often quietly ignored as long as appearances were maintained. There were unspoken rules about privacy, loyalty, and reputation. Andrew chose to focus on his career, his responsibilities, and their growing family. He and Camilla had 2 children, Tom and Laura, and for a while life seemed stable, at least on the outside. Still, the distance grew. It wasn't always dramatic. There were no loud fights or public scandals in those early years, but Andrew could feel it. Camilla wasn't fully present. There was a part of her that seemed unreachable, as if her heart was always elsewhere. He once said, "There was a wall separating us, and I could never climb it." That invisible wall would become the silent burden of their marriage. To the public, Andrew and Camilla looked like the perfect couple. But behind the smiles and social events, there was a quiet sadness, a marriage where one person had been chosen for stability, not passion. And soon, as Charles and Diana's troubles made headlines, that quiet sadness would grow into something impossible to ignore. Camilla, the wife. In the early years of their marriage, Camilla and Andrew Parker Bowles looked like a model couple. They married in July 1973 in a grand ceremony attended by members of the royal family, including Princess Anne and even Prince Charles. For a while, everything appeared to be in place. They were both from old, respected families. Andrew continued to rise in his military career, and Camilla managed the home and family life with skill and grace. Camilla gave birth to 2 children, Tom in 1974 and Laura in 1978. She took her role as a mother seriously. She was hands-on and affectionate, creating a stable home for them. She also knew how to manage their busy social life. The Parker Bowleses were often seen at polo matches, dinner parties, and weekend gatherings in the countryside. Camilla was charming, calm, and always knew how to say the right thing in public. She fulfilled every expectation of an aristocratic wife. Behind closed doors, however, things were different. While Camilla was present and polite, she was not emotionally open. The warmth and closeness that many young couples share began to fade quickly. According to Andrew, it wasn't dramatic. There were no fights or shouting, but there was distance. It felt as if Camilla had closed off part of herself, even while continuing to do everything right on the surface. Andrew began to notice small but clear signs. There were letters that she carefully tucked away in locked drawers. Sometimes, she would leave the room to take phone calls and come back quiet and withdrawn. She didn't offer explanations, and he stopped asking. Over time, this became their pattern. Things left unsaid, questions left unasked. Camilla continued to appear devoted, and in many ways she was. She stood by Andrew during his postings and work travels. She raised their children with care. She made sure they looked like the picture of aristocratic success. But the passion was gone. What remained was a kind of polite silence, a calm routine without deep connection. Theirs was not a marriage full of chaos or scandal in those early years, but it also wasn't full of love. Camilla had settled into her role, but her heart was never completely in it. Andrew, though loyal and committed, could never ignore the feeling that something vital was missing. And soon, as Prince Charles began to drift into an unhappy royal marriage of his own, that missing piece would come crashing back into the open. An emotional triangle. For many years, the public assumed Andrew Parker Bowles was simply the unlucky man caught in a royal love triangle. But according to Andrew himself, the truth was far more painful and complicated. This wasn't just about his wife having an affair with Prince Charles, it was about something deeper, something that slowly chipped away at his place in the marriage until it was almost like he didn't exist in it anymore. Andrew admitted that he always knew, even early on, that Charles had never truly left Camilla's life. Their affair in the early 1970s may have ended when Charles went away on naval duty and Camilla married Andrew. But the emotional connection between them didn't disappear. Charles was always there, not in body, but in their marriage, their home, and in Camilla's eyes. The emotional toll on Andrew built up over time. He said, "Charles never actually left our marriage, not for a moment." That sentence says it all. It wasn't about secret meetings or physical cheating. It was about how Charles remained emotionally tied to Camilla, and how Camilla never fully let go of that bond. Andrew felt like he was sharing his wife's love, attention, and loyalty with someone who wasn't even in the room. This kind of emotional conflict is hard to see from the outside. On the surface, Andrew and Camilla still looked like the perfect upper-class couple. They hosted parties, raised their children, and moved through royal circles with ease. But Andrew was suffering in silence. The presence of Charles was felt in their conversations, in Camilla's quiet moments, and even in the way she handled their relationship. At first, Andrew chose to look away. Affairs and emotional entanglements weren't unusual in aristocratic marriages. There was a kind of silent agreement in those circles. Don't embarrass each other, don't bring it out into the open, and life can go on. But Charles wasn't a temporary fling. He was a constant, and Andrew could feel it every single day. It wasn't just Andrew who noticed. Their children, Tom and Laura, also began to ask questions. Andrew remembered them wondering aloud, "Where is Mommy going this weekend?" It became harder and harder to come up with answers. Camilla would often disappear under the excuse of visiting friends or handling social duties, but it was clear she was seeing Charles. Even the children could sense the change in their family life. Andrew described the feeling in heartbreaking words, "You can survive betrayal, but you cannot endure being invisible." It wasn't the affair itself that hurt the most. It was being slowly erased. He felt like his role in Camilla's life had become less important, like he was no longer really seen as her husband. He wasn't part of her emotional world anymore. She gave him appearances, but not presence. Over the years, this emotional triangle drained the energy out of their marriage. There were no big confrontations or dramatic fights. Instead, there was a growing coldness. Camilla would light up when Charles's name came up in conversation, but show no interest when Andrew spoke about his military career or their children's school events. He began to withdraw. The silence between them grew heavier. Andrew had hoped things would settle, that time would soften Camilla's attachment to Charles, but it didn't. Charles was always there, in her thoughts, her movements, and her plans for the future. Eventually, Andrew stopped pretending that things would go back to how they were in the beginning. He learned to live with the truth, but it cost him. And soon that private pain would become a public spectacle when the world heard for itself just how close Camilla and Charles really were. The Camillagate bombshell. In January 1993, a late-night news story exploded into the British headlines and quickly spread across the world. A private phone call between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles had been secretly recorded and leaked to the press. The tape was intimate, personal, and deeply embarrassing for the royal family and for Andrew Parker Bowles. The scandal became known as Camillagate. The call had taken place years earlier in 1989, when both Charles and Camilla were still married to other people. But now, the entire country and much of the world heard them talking openly about their feelings, their longing, and their closeness. The recording left very little to the imagination. It confirmed what many had suspected, but no one had ever heard in such blunt, undeniable detail. For most people, it was a shocking moment. Newspapers printed full transcripts of the call. Headlines mocked the couple. Radio hosts joked about the content. It was humiliating on a public level, and it sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace. But for Andrew Parker Bowles, it wasn't a surprise. It was only a confirmation of something he had already lived with for years. When asked about the scandal later, Andrew said simply, "I wasn't surprised." That short sentence said everything. He had known. Not necessarily every word, but the truth of it. The emotional and physical closeness between Charles and Camilla had long been part of his reality. The leak didn't bring him new information. It just made private pain into a public one. Andrew had lived with the quiet knowledge of his wife's feelings for another man. He had raised children with her, stood beside her at public events, and carried on with their lives as though everything was fine. But inside, their marriage had already become hollow. The phone tapes didn't destroy their marriage. They only made it impossible to keep pretending it still existed. What the public didn't see was how the scandal pushed an already distant relationship into emotional finality. Before the leak, Andrew and Camilla still lived under the same roof. They were still, in many ways, a functioning couple, at least on paper. But after Camillagate, there was nothing left to save. Camilla was no longer just emotionally attached to Charles. She was now publicly tied to him. Her voice on the tape showed the world exactly where her heart had always been. For Andrew, this was not just embarrassing, it was the end. Not in an angry or loud way, but in a quiet, resigned one. Any hope of repairing the marriage or continuing to live in polite silence disappeared. Soon after, Andrew and Camilla formally separated. Collapse of a marriage. By the late 1980s, the Parker Bowles marriage had changed in ways that were hard to ignore. Outwardly, it still looked stable. Andrew and Camilla appeared together at social events, kept up their public duties, and maintained a shared household. But inside their home, the connection had faded. The marriage, once full of shared goals and traditions, was now only surviving on habit and image. It was a quiet collapse, slow, controlled, and deeply sad. Andrew, after years of trying to keep things together, had started to emotionally check out. Friends noticed he had become more distant, more absorbed in his military work and social life outside the home. He was still present physically, but not emotionally. He had stopped trying to fix what was broken because he no longer believed it could be fixed. Meanwhile, Camilla's absences grew longer and more frequent. She often left for days at a time, sometimes for weekends, sometimes longer. Her excuses were always accepted: visits with friends, trips to the countryside, time away from London, but those close to the couple knew the truth. Her relationship with Prince Charles had become the center of her emotional life. Her heart, and often her attention, was no longer in the Parker Bowles household. This growing distance affected the family. Their two children, Tom and Laura, were raised in a world where appearances were carefully managed, but warmth was in short supply. Camilla still did her part as a mother, but even the children began to notice her shifting focus. According to those close to the family, her visits became more like scheduled appearances than natural moments of motherhood. At home, the atmosphere became cold and formal. Rooms were kept tidy, conversations were brief, and there was an overall sense of walking on eggshells. The home was no longer a private space where people felt safe or close. It became a stage, a place that looked like a marriage but no longer held one. Andrew later reflected on this time, saying, "She stopped being my wife. She became someone else's partner in ambition." That sentence captured the heart of the issue. Camilla wasn't just drifting emotionally. She had redirected her loyalty, her affection, and her energy to someone else's world, to Charles, to the idea of a different life, and to a purpose outside their marriage. The collapse wasn't dramatic. There were no loud arguments or public fallouts. It was quiet, slow, and hidden behind polite smiles and public duty. But by the end of the 1980s, there was nothing real left between Andrew and Camilla. Their marriage was a formality, something they lived in but no longer shared. The final straw. As the Parker Bowles marriage fell apart, something in Camilla began to change. In the early years, she had been known for her earthy humor, her casual charm, and her lack of interest in public life. But slowly that version of Camilla faded. In her place emerged someone more focused, more aware of her position, and far more strategic. By the mid-1990s, Camilla was no longer just Charles's companion. She was building something larger. She began to form a network, Friends in the media, courtiers who knew how to manage public image, and quiet supporters in political and aristocratic circles all became part of her new orbit. Those close to her noticed a change at home, too. Her desk, once filled with party invitations and casual notes, now carried press clippings, media briefings, and communications from Charles's office. She was studying how the public viewed her and how she could shape that view. The light-hearted wife of a military man was becoming a long-term partner to the future king. She wasn't planning dinner parties anymore, one friend said. She was planning a future beside the king. Camilla began managing her own narrative. She became more careful in public, more refined in how she spoke and dressed, and more involved in the royal household's unofficial affairs. This shift didn't happen overnight. But step by step, Camilla moved from being a background figure to someone quietly but firmly, steering her way toward a royal role. The divorce. By the time Andrew and Camilla Parker Bowles officially filed for divorce, their marriage had already been emotionally over for years. The love, the trust, and the connection had slowly faded. And by the early 1990s, what remained was a quiet, distant arrangement that no longer held meaning for either of them. Andrew had reached a point of calm detachment. He was no longer trying to fix anything. After Camilla's quiet confession that their marriage had always been transitory, he knew the bond was broken beyond repair. Camilla, meanwhile, was already living a life emotionally anchored elsewhere, beside Prince Charles. Her public image remained that of a wife and mother, but behind closed doors, she had moved on. The divorce itself began quietly. There were no public fights or loud accusations. Both Andrew and Camilla had reasons to keep things calm. The children were now grown and both parents were protective of them. But there was also pressure from outside the family, especially from the royal household. The palace had a clear message. This needed to look respectable, discreet, no drama, no headlines. Camilla was deeply tied to Prince Charles by then, and anything messy in her divorce could reflect poorly on him and, by extension, the monarchy. They wanted it to look clean, to protect her, Charles, and the image, Andrew later said. I agreed. He didn't fight it. He didn't ask for public sympathy or air their private struggles. He knew how things worked. The monarchy moved carefully. Appearances mattered. The truth that his marriage had slowly crumbled under the weight of another man's emotional presence wasn't going to be part of the official story. On January 11, 1995, the divorce was finalized. It was announced as a mutual decision, with both parties expressing respect for one another. There was no blame given, no public tension. It looked like a dignified end to a long marriage. But for Andrew, that formality did little to soften the deeper truth. On paper, it was clean. Behind the scenes, it had been painful, lonely, and quietly devastating. His wife had never fully been his. His home had slowly emptied of connection. His role had been quietly rewritten from husband to placeholder to former. When the legal documents were signed, it didn't feel like the beginning of freedom. It felt more like the closing of a long, slow goodbye that had started years earlier. And yet, even in that quiet exit, Andrew maintained his dignity. He left with little public complaint. He gave no interviews attacking Camilla. He simply stepped out of a life that had moved on without him. After the painful end of his marriage to Camilla Parker Bowles, Andrew chose a path of quiet dignity. Unlike many in his position, he did not sell his story to the press or seek public attention. The tabloids and gossip columns could have been filled with his version of events, but Andrew preferred to disappear from the spotlight rather than fuel scandal. In 1996, he remarried Rosemary Dickinson, a woman who shared his love for a simple, grounded life. This new chapter was markedly different. Away from the drama of high society and royal affairs, Andrew found comfort in everyday things: horses, his military career, and close friendships that valued sincerity over status. His return to military service was more than a job. It was a way to regain control and purpose. The structure and discipline of the army helped him rebuild himself emotionally and mentally. He also embraced his lifelong passion for horses, spending time riding and caring for them, which gave him peace. Reflecting on this period, Andrew once said, "Life without Camilla wasn't lonely. It was real." For him, it was a chance to live authentically, without the shadows of the past clouding his days. He found contentment not in headlines or status, but in being true to himself and those who cared for him. The unspoken truth. Years later, Andrew watched quietly as Camilla's life took a very different turn. From the woman he once knew, full of charm but somewhat carefree, she had transformed into a figure of immense power and influence. Her rise from the role of a discreet mistress to becoming the queen consort was dramatic and, to Andrew, almost unrecognizable. "I barely recognized her," he admitted. "She got what she wanted, but not what she needed." This transformation was more than just a change in title. It was about ambition, image, and identity. Camilla had worked hard behind the scenes, building alliances, managing her public image, and positioning herself within the royal family. The woman who once seemed grounded had become a calculated figure navigating complex social and political landscapes. Andrew's observation wasn't bitter but thoughtful. He saw how ambition can reshape a person, sometimes at the cost of personal happiness or true connection. Camilla had achieved her goal of standing beside the king, but Andrew believed that the cost had been high, emotionally and personally. Her journey highlighted a larger truth about power and identity, that the roles people play can sometimes hide who they really are or who they hope to become. Andrew's reflections on the whole saga offer a new way to understand the famous Charles-Camilla-Diana story. Most public narratives focus on the scandal, the affair, the divorce, and the eventual marriage of Charles and Camilla. But Andrew points to a deeper, more complicated truth. He believes the real cost of Camilla's rise was not just public scandal, but a toll on everyone's souls. It was a story about choices, sacrifices, and the painful effects of ambition on relationships. Camilla's decision to pursue her place by Charles's side came at the expense of others, including Andrew himself and even Diana. He has spoken with respect about Diana, saying, "She wasn't mad. She was mourning a man she never had." This shows Andrew's understanding that Diana's pain was not just about betrayal, but about losing a love she had hoped for but never truly shared. For Andrew, the heartbreak was clear and personal. It wasn't Charles, it was Camilla. She chose her life over ours. This statement challenges the common view that places all the blame on Charles. Instead, Andrew points to Camilla's calculated decisions and ambitions as the driving force behind the emotional damage. In the end, Andrew's story invites us to reconsider the public history we've been told. It's a reminder that behind every headline, there are real people with real losses and truths that often remain hidden. If you found this video interesting, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next.